I'm Pamela, 30 years old, and I've been married to Patrick for 3 years. We don't have kids yet, but everything changed when Patrick's father, Jesse, unexpectedly passed away from a heart attack. We were living in a different state at the time, and the news hit us hard. At the funeral, Patrick's uncle made a pointed remark, suggesting that since Patrick was the youngest and only son, he should return home to be closer to family and help his mother, Mary, through the loss. A few months later, Patrick told me he'd arranged a transfer to a job near his family. He made the decision on his own and told me afterward. I was hurt. Such a big change should have involved both of us. When I voiced my frustration, Patrick apologized, explaining that he had anticipated my reaction. He acknowledged that I had a strained relationship with his mother, which wasn't a secret. During our time living far away, we visited infrequently, usually only for major holidays. Mary often complained about it, comparing us to Patrick's sisters, Amanda and Diane, who lived closer and visited regularly. Despite the distance, Patrick always stood by our choice. My relationship with Mary had always been uneasy but manageable, until she started pressuring us about children. During one summer visit, she bluntly asked me if I could even have kids, making the conversation uncomfortable. Her assumptions about my fertility were invasive, and it left me questioning how much we truly understood one another. Still, I decided to move closer to support Patrick, reasoning that we wouldn't be living with his mother full-time. Surprisingly, Mary seemed pleased when I made the decision. A few weeks later, she invited me over for tea, the first time I'd accepted such an invitation, albeit reluctantly. When I arrived, Amanda and Mary were already there, waiting for me. "Pamela, it's been so long. Why haven't you visited since moving here?" Amanda asked, her words dripping with sarcasm. Inside, I already regretted coming. Mary quickly added, "I was so happy when you decided to move closer, but now, it seems I was wrong. You don't like me, do you?" I almost said, yes, just to see her reaction, but I stopped myself. "It's not that I dislike you," I replied. "I've just been adjusting to the new environment and have been feeling a little under the weather." It wasn't a complete lie. I had been fatigued, but I hadn't anticipated a visit like this. Why was I here, enduring their pointed comments? Mary immediately accused me of disliking her, but wasn't it the other way around? How were we supposed to get along under these circumstances? Amanda cut in sharply. "How can you speak to your mother-in-law like that? Apologize to her, now." I thought for sure Mary would fire back with anger, but instead, she surprised me. "You're right," she said quietly. "I've been harsh. I'm sorry, Pamela. And about the comments on children, I was being nosy." I expected a lecture or some veiled insult, but there was none. Even Amanda seemed stunned. "All I've ever wanted is a grandchild," Mary confessed, her voice softer now. She explained that Amanda's husband was infertile and Diane was struggling with fertility issues, so she had pinned her hopes on Patrick and me. Patrick and I had discussed having children, and though we were taking our time, it was something we'd been considering. "So, please be patient with me," Mary added, her tone more pleading than before. I nodded, feeling a mixture of obligation and empathy. "We'll get there in time, just give us space," I said, lowering my head slightly. "And please, do visit us when you can." After that, the conversation shifted, and Mary and Amanda resumed sipping their tea and watching TV, as if the tension had never existed. "I really like this announcer," Mary said, almost cheerfully. "She's so lively." Sitting there, watching them, I felt a strange pang of regret. Maybe if I had been more open, things between Mary and me could have been different, but it was a fleeting thought, one I knew wasn't realistic. My optimism about the visit quickly faded, though I held on to the hope that our relationship could improve. That evening, Patrick stormed in, visibly upset. "I heard from Mom that you said you don't want to get along with her." She was crying. "Pamela, what did you say to her?" I was taken aback. Only hours earlier, he had left for work with a smile, and now he was accusing me of causing trouble. "Patrick, there's been a misunderstanding," I explained. "I didn't say that. I told her it's hard to be friends right now, given everything that's happened." "How does that translate into not wanting to get along?" I could see the doubt in his eyes. He seemed to believe Mary's version of events. It hurt. I had hoped he would understand, but it felt like we were drifting farther apart. Just then, my phone buzzed with a message from Amanda. "After everything we've done to get you here, weren't you ready to make this work? If you're here, you need to be more patient with us." Patrick looked at me, almost as if echoing Amanda's words. I wasn't here just to please Mary and her daughters. I was here for Patrick. But as I met his gaze, a painful realization hit me. It's clear that Mary and the others might never accept me, I said, my voice tight. Maybe you should consider someone she likes better. The word divorce slipped out before I could stop it, and for the first time, Patrick looked truly alarmed. Wait, he said, his voice cracking, how did we jump to divorce? I just want you to get along better with my family, Patrick said, bewilderment coloring his voice as the conversation took an unexpected turn. He didn't understand that his family might never accept me, and I couldn't grasp why he couldn't see it either. But Patrick seemed determined to resolve this misunderstanding, and that left me feeling conflicted. The next day, Patrick returned late from work, his face tight with frustration. He relayed his conversation with his mother. She admitted there had been a misunderstanding and apologized. What a fuss, he muttered. Then he shifted the focus to Mary's upcoming birthday and suggested, how about we celebrate at a fancy restaurant? The sudden transition from tension to talk of celebration left me dumbfounded. Patrick was trying, but it felt like we were still walking on eggshells. His suggestion to present the dinner as my idea seemed like an attempt to shift his mother's perception of me, but I wasn't sure if it would work. Mary's complicated personality made me skeptical of any gestures truly reaching her. Despite my doubts, I agreed to make the reservation, including Amanda and the others in the guest list, specifying a table for 8. As the day of the dinner approached, unease settled over me. Patrick had been distant, his responses cold and curt whenever I tried to engage in conversation. The more he withdrew, the more isolated I felt. When we arrived at the restaurant, we found Mary, Amanda, and their spouses already seated. The host led Patrick and me to our table, throwing a curious glance our way, which only amplified my discomfort. Happy birthday, Mary, I greeted her brightly, trying to bridge the gap between us. But Mary didn't even acknowledge me. Instead, she turned to the others, graciously thanking them for coming. The snub was clear, and it stung. I thought this was a family gathering, Amanda remarked, giving me a quick, confused look. Diane, sensing the tension, shot me a concerned glance. I realized with a heavy heart that I had been deliberately excluded from the conversation. Determined not to let the evening be ruined, I resolved to keep my distance and leave early. Just as I was planning my exit, a staff member approached our table with an uncomfortable air. I'm sorry, but the reservation was made for 7 people, he said hesitantly. I blinked, confused. No, I specifically booked for 8. Could there be a mistake? The waiter hesitated before confirming. Yes, you booked for 8, but a week ago, a gentleman called to change it to 7. I turned to Patrick, my mind racing. Patrick, what's going on? He met my gaze, unfazed. Yes, 7 is fine. Everyone's here now, he confirmed. A rush of betrayal and disbelief washed over me. Patrick had called the restaurant, pretended to be me, and reduced the reservation, without consulting me. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. All his talk about smoothing things over was just that, talk. Before I could process what had just happened, Patrick shot me a look, his voice dripping with accusation. I heard from Mom that you've been bad-mouthing our family, saying I don't earn enough and I'm insensitive. You've had a lot to say, huh? A week ago, when he had spoken to Mary about the dinner, she must have filled his ears with lies. Blinded by anger and too quick to believe her, Patrick had changed the reservation without telling me. I stood there in shock, not knowing how to respond. What are you talking about? I asked, voice shaky. You've changed the reservation behind my back, after everything? Instead of apologizing, Patrick demanded that I apologize to everyone at the table. He told me to go home alone and think things over. My heart sank. I couldn't apologize for something I hadn't said. I didn't need a husband who sided with his mother's lies over his wife. As frustration and tears welled up, Patrick began to panic, but it was too late. Mary watched the scene unfold with a smug smile, clearly pleased with how things were playing out. Next time, I said coldly, marry someone younger, more obedient, maybe then you'll have children and be happier. Mary's voice cut through the tension. Pamela, why don't you go back to your parents' house? A daughter-in-law is always an outsider. You're not charming at all, so please leave. Her words stung like a slap to the face, but they only solidified my resolve. I'd leave even without you telling me, I shot back. Maybe you should try to find someone who can put up with someone as twisted as you. I turned and walked toward the exit, ignoring the chaos I left behind. Patrick was silent, his head buried in his hands. But just as I reached the door, I heard someone call my name. I froze. It was Diane and her husband. Pamela, wait, Diane called, her voice full of distress. I can't stand it anymore. Mom and Amanda haven't changed at all. I knew the gossip about you was false. Diane's words, full of understanding and support, offered a small but precious comfort. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me feel less alone. As she continued, indicating that she was ready to cut ties with the toxicity of her family, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for some solidarity. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Mary's name flashing across the screen. I groaned. Ugh, what now? I muttered, but before I could answer, the name changed to Patrick. I sighed, watching Diane and her husband exchange knowing looks. Pamela, Diane said, her tone almost mischievous, you might want to go back to the restaurant. You might see something interesting. They left, looking oddly satisfied with themselves, and I hesitated. Curiosity gnawed at me, so despite everything, I returned to the restaurant. When I answered the phone, Patrick's voice was frantic, almost panicked. Pamela, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was all a lie. I'll send the divorce papers later, he blurted out, then quickly added, wait, can you come back, please? It's a lifetime request. His voice, desperate and almost childish, made me chuckle darkly, but I remembered Diane's cryptic words. There was something else going on here, something I hadn't anticipated. So, despite everything, I turned around and headed back to the restaurant, knowing the evening was far from over. I walked into an unexpected scene. The restaurant was buzzing with tension. A crowd had gathered around Patrick's table, where a local TV announcer, Mary's favorite, was speaking into a microphone. The atmosphere felt like it was on the verge of boiling over. Mary, visibly flustered, was struggling to explain herself. No, that's not what happened. It's all a misunderstanding, she stammered, her words tripping over each other. Patrick and Amanda stood nearby, awkward and uneasy, clearly unprepared for the camera's glare. The announcer, microphone in hand, wasn't letting Mary off the hook. You loudly declared in the restaurant that Pamela is an outsider and should leave. What exactly did you mean by that? Can you explain in detail? The interviewer's tone was sharp, and Mary was visibly caught off guard. I stood frozen, taking in the surreal spectacle. Diane's husband, along with a few other guests who had been offended by the earlier events, had quietly slipped away, no doubt weary of the drama. It all felt like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. This had become a public spectacle, and I was slowly realizing it was likely being broadcasted live. As my mind raced, I remembered the reservation mix-up, which I had forgotten to clarify in the chaos of the evening. Just then, a staff member approached, sensing my confusion. It's been quite a day, hasn't it? The waiter remarked, explaining that a TV recording had been scheduled at the restaurant that very day, which explained the cameras and microphones. The entire ordeal was unfolding live for the public to witness, casting the family's drama in an unfiltered, harsh light. The realization hit hard. I wasn't just an unwilling participant in a family feud. This had become their spectacle, and now it was being exposed for all to see. I took a step back, processing the absurdity of it all, when the famous TV announcer, eager to keep the momentum going, approached Mary with a wide grin. An interview? Absolutely, Mary exclaimed, her enthusiasm almost comical. It was clear she loved being in the spotlight. The announcer turned to her with a calculated question. We heard there was a heated argument earlier. Your daughter-in-law left in tears. Can you tell us what happened? Caught off guard, Mary and Amanda's faces drained of color. Neither of them could summon the courage to explain the true depth of the manipulations they had orchestrated. The truth was too ugly, and there was no way to cover it up now. From across the room, Patrick spotted me, and his face twisted in panic. Pamela, please, don't let this get out. It's all just a misunderstanding, he pleaded, his voice desperate, but at that moment, my feelings for him had evaporated. There was nothing left to salvage. Mary, trying to regain some semblance of control, flashed a strange, almost forced smile at me. Oh, we usually call each other Pamela, right? Pamela, come over here, she called, as though this would smooth everything over. I walked toward the camera, feeling a cold calmness settle over me. The announcer shifted the microphone toward me. You say you call each other Pamela, but how does the daughter-in-law view her mother-in-law? she asked, pressing for my response. I took a deep breath, my words measured but firm. I've never been called that, I said flatly. I've been called unpatriotic, though, for not having children, but that's because Patrick and I are not ready or confident enough to start a family. We haven't even tried in over 2 years. That's what I've been told is grounds for divorce. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Patrick supported me when I first got sick and had to take a leave from work. I appreciated his kindness, and I followed him here, hoping a change of scenery would help. But this is the result, I continued, the words flowing now with a clarity I hadn't expected. The anger and hurt I'd buried for so long now had an outlet, and though I was numb, a small satisfaction bloomed in my chest as I saw the discomfort on Mary and Amanda's faces. The announcer shifted her gaze, clearly realizing there was more to this story. As I finished, I couldn't help but smile, knowing the broadcast would air across the region, exposing their manipulations to the public. Mary's expression faltered as she realized the consequences of her actions. Well, since I'm considered an outsider, I said, my voice steady, I guess I should leave. Goodbye. I turned to walk out, ignoring the shouts and commotion that followed. I stepped outside the restaurant, feeling an odd sense of release. The day had been long, but in that final moment, the weight of years of frustration and hurt lifted. Walking away, I felt free, no longer trapped in the chaos and manipulation of Patrick's family. Though Mary and her family managed to prevent the broadcast from airing in full, the incident quickly became the talk of the town. Gossip spread like wildfire, and the aftermath of the public spectacle fueled discussions and speculations among our relatives and acquaintances. The story of what had happened became an unspoken, yet well-known, narrative, and I was no longer just the outsider they had cast me as. In the days that followed, I packed my belongings and moved back to my parents' house. I sent Patrick the divorce papers, but his response was delayed, which led me to consider seeking legal help. Just when I thought I had finally escaped the drama, Patrick showed up at my parents' house. My father, Peter, who had always been a calm, composed man, took charge of the situation with an unwavering authority. Patrick, looking broken, offered a heartfelt apology. He promised to sever ties with his family and to trust only me from now on, but his words felt empty. Too little, too late. Peter, visibly upset by everything Patrick had put me through, didn't mince words. Why didn't you realize this sooner? What have you done to Pamela all these years? Just sign the divorce papers and leave, he said firmly. Patrick, his eyes filled with regret, handed over the divorce papers. His handwriting was shaky, barely legible, but despite the hesitance, the papers were signed, and the divorce was finalized. As time passed, the truth came to light. Amanda had been the cause of her infertility all along, not her husband. She had projected her frustrations onto him, and now, on the brink of her own divorce, she no longer visited her in-laws. Patrick moved back in with Mary, likely to face the same toxic environment, but that chapter of my life was closed. In the years that followed, life took a more positive turn. I reconnected with a classmate from my hometown, and we married. Our relationship was filled with love and joy, and soon, we were blessed with a child. Our daughter, now 2 years old, brought an indescribable joy into my life, and, to my surprise, I found out I was expecting our second child. My new mother-in-law was everything Mary was not: supportive, kind, and understanding. Life had proven to be unpredictable, but now, I was surrounded by love and support, things I had once thought were beyond my reach, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly happy.